Ricky Johnson doesn't get the credit he deserves. It seems like nowadays when we have discussions of the pantheon of greats or the Mount Rushmore of the sport, we all know you talk about Ricky Carmichael and Jeremy McGrath, king of Supercross, the greatest of all time. The modern guys, just based on the numbers alone, are mind-boggling. When you look at the amount of titles and wins that Villopoto and Dungey and Stewart and Reed had, you have to include them in any all-time greats discussion. And then, to give the token, cursory nod to the old school, you throw in Bob Hanna's name. Now, Bob Hanna has done an excellent job. He branded himself before an athlete branding himself was even a known thing. And he branded himself with the best brand possible, which is just being the gnarliest, meanest, toughest SOB out there, so that for the rest of time, any time there's a discussion of being gnarly or tough, or how would this guy handle this gnarly situation, Bob Hanna's name is going to get into that conversation. And even in the 30 years since he's retired, Bob Hanna never fails to act like Bob Hanna anytime he's in the spotlight, which just reminds everybody of what Bob Hanna was like. Bob Hanna is the man. Bob Hanna is awesome. And now looking back, maybe we shouldn't be so quick to just say, oh, it's McGrath and Carmichael. Hanna paved the way for everybody and everything. If you want to say Hanna was really the best, not going to get an argument from me. But one thing I will argue is that Ricky Johnson doesn't get the credit he deserves. If you look at the wins and the numbers and the type of domination that RJ had, it's very much the same level that Hanna had in his prime. And where Hanna's numbers were stunted because he broke his leg after winning 3 straight titles, well, RJ broke his wrist while leading the Supercross points in 1989. And he was never the same. Now, maybe I'm biased because I grew up in the era of Rick Johnson, battling it out with Jeff Ward. Those guys were great. And I know this, for a 3-season span, really 3.5, before the wrist injury, 1986, 1987, 1988, and the beginning of 1989, you pretty much knew Rick Johnson was the man to beat, whether it was Supercross or Motocross, 250s or 500s. And while I know it seems like several riders have dominated over a sustained period of time like that, if you really start to look at it, a full season of Supercross and outdoors, 3 straight years, dominating or really being the guy to beat, that really doesn't happen very often. Chad Reed was in and out. Villopoto was in and out with injuries. Stewart in and out with injuries. Dungey did get there, but it was often when those guys were in and out with injuries. Johnson basically showed up every time and was the guy to beat, and then got hurt at the peak of his powers. Now, this week on Racer X Online, we are celebrating what I think is the best Supercross race ever. No, not the famous Rick Johnson versus David Bailey battle at Anaheim 1986. That might have been the best one-on-one battle. But to me, the race that really sticks out, if you had the model Supercross, the race you wish you could see every weekend, the race where 10 or 12 riders were passing each other back and forth and the win was in doubt the entire time, it's Atlanta 1990. Let me give you the quick synopsis of how this race went. Damon Bradshaw gets the lead. Johnny O'Mara takes the lead from him. They battle it out. The Jeff Stanton gets in the battle, passes O'Mara. O'Mara passes him back. Rick Johnson closes in. Guy Cooper closes in. Then somewhere in the back, Rick Johnson starts moving forward. Johnson gets toward the front. Johnson starts making passes. Stanton makes a mistake and goes off the track. Then Mike Kudrowski starts moving forward. Kudrowski starts making passes. Cooper passes Bradshaw. Cooper stalls. Bradshaw retakes the lead. Kudrowski catches Bradshaw. Kudrowski tries to pass Bradshaw where you cannot pass. They take each other out. Cooper finds himself in the lead again, but then RJ's still right there. Then RJ passes Cooper. Then Cooper passes RJ back. And then Jeff Ward, who was in 13th at one point, is slowly but surely closing from third. With 2 laps to go, he passes Rick Johnson for second. With 1 lap to go, he passes Guy Cooper to take the lead and the win. If every Supercross race would be that exciting, we'd be millionaires because this industry would be about 3,000 times more popular than it is right now. People be like, screw the NFL. I want to watch those dirt bike races where 8 different guys pass each other for the lead and it goes down to the last lap every week. And since we don't have any races to cover over the Easter weekend, we decided we would just cover a race retro style. So we had Steve Mathis call up Jeff Ward and Guy Cooper, who went 1-2 in that race. And we've got interviews with them on the Racer X site. I also encourage you to go back, look through Steve's podcast. Steve and I did a whole 1990 season retrospective a couple of months ago, late 2017. That was really cool, too, and it included a lot of information on this Atlanta 1990 event. But there's one other rider that we have to speak with about Atlanta 1990. That's Rick Johnson. A year earlier, Johnson started the 89 championship, winning the first 5 races. In Atlanta 89, he had a great battle with his young teammate Jeff Stanton. He crashed and Stanton won. RJ finished second. 5 wins and a second place in the first 6 rounds of the season. And then the next week, he gets landed on in practice at the Gainesville National, breaks his wrist. Tries to come back in 89, not quite the same. Beginning of 1990, still not quite the same. He's getting 5th and 6th, kind of under the radar. Finally, in Atlanta 1990, you start to see vintage Rick Johnson, and that's actually what the announcers for the TV broadcast, Larry Myers and Dave Despain, maybe the best combo ever, that's what they were saying throughout the show. This is vintage Rick Johnson as he tried to work his way toward the front of the pack, even got into the lead a few times, and the Atlanta crowd starts to really get into it, thinking, finally, RJ's back. We're going to see an RJ victory. Everyone loves a comeback, especially when it's a comeback from someone who had reached the highest of heights and then went all the way down and was coming back up. About 15 laps in to the 1990 Atlanta Supercross, maybe the most stacked field ever, maybe the best battle ever, it looked like Rick Johnson was going to come out on top. But he didn't. Because what we couldn't tell by watching it is that actually RJ's wrist wasn't getting better. It continued to get worse. And in this race, it was starting to give out. And in the end, Rick Johnson ended up finishing 3rd. He went back and forth at the lead with Guy Cooper. With 2 laps to go, Jeff Ward, who I don't even think Johnson realized was there, snuck up on him, took second away. On the last lap, Ward took the lead away from Cooper, and they came over the finish line, bang, 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 1, 2, 3. But Johnson wasn't done. The next weekend at the Gainesville opener, 1 year after where he hurt his wrist, he outdueled the defending new 250 Series champion, Stanton, to win in another epic battle. It went literally down to the final inch as they battled each other going across the finish line. Johnson won the National. It looked like RJ was back, and in fact that was the headline on the Cycle News cover for that race. A 3rd in Atlanta, leading laps, winning the Gainesville National. It was on until RJ crashed at Daytona and did some more damage to that hand. As it turns out, that crash was pretty much inevitable because the damage he was doing to his wrist to try to win these races was only making things worse. In discussing Atlanta 89, I feel we have to give Rick Johnson his due. It would end up being his last Supercross podium. It was the last Supercross race where he led laps. It was the last Supercross race where the old superstar was the superstar again. Let's talk 1990 Atlanta Supercross, what looked like the beginning of the beginning, but was actually the beginning of the end for Rick Johnson. Let's go. Podcast. 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 Oh, yeah. And as always, the Racetracks Exhaust Podcast is brought to you by the folks at Yoshimura. 63 years of research and development, the leader in 4-stroke performance with unsurpassed quality, service, and development. Yoshimura is the brand you want for your dirt bike, ATV, or street exhaust. Check them out, yoshimura-rd.com. So let's get into our conversation with Rick Johnson. I have a sinister plan to corner Rick Johnson in a section of the Mexican desert in a pre-run truck where he cannot escape and has to answer the hard questions about the demons that have haunted his career since being knocked out at the top due to the wrist injury. But we'll get to that in another podcast. Here I just wanted to talk Atlanta 1990, but you can tell the demons are there, and the fact that this wrist injury hurt him so badly, not just physically, but spiritually, to be taken out at the peak of your powers, that's going to stick with this man for life. And I think you'll hear that come through in this podcast. Thanks for the time, RJ. Let's go.
So it was an action-packed 3 weeks.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, that's what I remember of this. This was the first of wait, I think RJ's getting it back. RJ almost won. RJ got on the podium. Then the next week you do win Glen Helen. So it seemed like, at least on the outside, Gatorback, Gainesville, not Glen Helen, a G race.
Yep.
It started to look like you were getting it back.
Yeah.
Did you feel you were getting it back?
Well, for two reasons. One, I was massively hitting what they call NSAID, which is the anti-inflammatory, which is a precursor to Advil and all these other things. Mm-hmm. But it was the straight up OG prescription, and when I took that, it took the inflammation out of my wrist, and I could hold on. But what I would do is punish my wrist worse because I could hold on, and then I was screwed for like 2 to 3 days afterwards. So I could barely use my hand. Mm-hmm. So I felt that I was in great physical shape. As far as, if you look at the pictures, I was really lean, probably the skinniest I ever was. Brock Glover was helping me when it came to running and cycling and helping me on that side because he was retired and was helping me out. And I was also working with Jeff Spencer. So I was doing everything that I could to make myself better. But the problem was I was still compromised in all of my riding. I couldn't brake as hard. I couldn't charge the face of jumps as hard. It kind of made me average. And so my timing was decent, but whenever I would get off a little bit, like I would mistime something and whoops or anything like that, my hand would want to come off the handlebars. So I wasn't back. I was back everywhere but my right hand. And so at Atlanta, adrenaline and everything had me going. But if you watch, you can see how my right shoulder dips and how my technique is compromised. Not taking anything away from Wardy, or Guy or anybody else who was in that race, but I was compromised.
How much of that? I see that race now, and I look. Yeah, you weren't. Because of the wrist, you weren't what you were. I look at it like a baseball player when they say a pitcher comes in, he's 20 years old, he throws 100 miles an hour, and then when he's 30, he's got to learn how to actually pitch and be smart and get dudes out because he can't just physically overpower everybody. Was that kind of race? You're using your experience, your smarts, your knowledge, because you couldn't just charge stuff like the old days.
Right. Because I think one of the things that made me when I had my great days, I was strong and I was able to jump a little further and hit stuff a little harder and take a little bit more of a beating than other people because I was physically bigger than Jeff Ward. And I think I was mentally not as smart as David Bailey, so I had a little bit of Hannah and Magoo in me, but I also felt that I was good at picking lines and stuff. So to answer your question, absolutely, I was trying everything that I knew. I was trying everything from yoga, jiu-jitsu, to all these different things to try to find something that wasn't out there. Because when you're right hand, it's the throttle is twisting and doing so many things and is so dynamic. And I was like a toggle switch, and so that's what it looked like.
So do you remember moments of that race? Like you had the lead once or twice, and do you remember details like that?
Well, yeah, I remember certain things. Like I always remember the dirt being soft and traction good, and you could charge, and that played into that was better for me because when it was sketchy California tracks, harder base, more square edge, and in the corners you had to be really far forward and a lot of weight on the front wheel to get it to turn. But when you went to Atlanta, you got the soft dirt. You rode it more like an outdoor. You leaned back and you gassed it harder because you had the berms to lean on, and so that played into helping me with my wrist because the body position forward is what really killed me. The whole Gary Bailey elbows up, body forward. That wasn't happening with me anymore. I was more Guy Cooper, elbows plastered to my side, and whiskey throttle as much as possible.
The reason we bring this race up, your battle with Bailey at Anaheim 86 is always talked about as maybe the best one-on-one battle. And this Atlanta one is like the best that I can remember of like 12 guys, 10 guys passing each other, going at it. Everybody had their shot. Do you have any idea why that race was so good? Was it the track? Was it the conditions? Is it just lightning in a bottle? Or was there anything at the end of that where you're like, well, there was something about that night where everybody was going for it, or the track or something?
I think you had a lot of dynamics. You had Guy Cooper that wanted to win so bad. He was so close so many times, and then you had Wardy that was hanging on, me that was trying to fight my way back. You had Stanton who was, you had all this different dynamic. Stanton that wanted to prove that he was the champion, and I mean there was so many different guys, and I think because because I think everyone still felt they had a shot at a Supercross championship. They didn't submit to me or to Wardy or to Bailey or to Hannah or to James Stewart or whoever it was. It was still I can do this, you know, and that's the attitude that a lot of those guys had.
Yeah, that led to good racing. Now, when you were making passes, if you watch the TV show, people are cheering because I think late in the race they're like, "Oh my God, yes, RJ's going to win. RJ's going to get it back." And there are obviously a lot of people that like that kind of story. Could you sense that? Did you hear that? Because on the TV show, you can hear them going nuts when you're making passes.
Yeah, you definitely hear it, and it was pumping me up. And then on the other side, you know, my hand's starting to go to shit, and I'm like going, I am crumbling in front of all these people. They're like, no, don't give up. I'm like, I'm not giving up. I can't help it. I'm trying as hard as I can. They're like, oh, he still sucks. That
sucks. It's good and bad, I guess. Good and bad.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is, man, because you're like, oh yeah, oh shit. Now that everyone wants me to win. Oh shit, I'm going to let everybody down. This sucks. This sucks really bad. Now, can everyone leave now? Jeff Ward's got a big lead. I'm never going to catch him.
It was pretty close right down to then. Even last lap or two, I mean, Ward got you, and then you were right there with Cooper. Even on the last lap, you're like, I can still do this, or did you know at that point, like, the way your wrist was feeling? Or were you still going for it?
I was still going for it because you never know. You can always, you know, because Wardy was always so precise on clearance stuff. If I figure if he cased it one time, you know, his ankles were pretty brittle. Maybe he'd hurt himself, and I could win. I've had the, I don't know if you want to call it arrogance or stupidity, but I've always had the feeling that I can win any race. I went into my very first Supercross thinking of what I was going to say on the podium.
And this is not 125 class. I didn't have that back then. You're going against the stars.
I'm 16 years old. I just turned 16 3 weeks before at San Diego Supercross in 1981 on a production bike, and I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to say? Who do I got to thank? And all that stuff. And then Marty Smith suckered me into the gate. I didn't make the main event, so I was just a little disappointed.
Okay, so it doesn't always work out, but you're always at least thinking you have a shot. Yeah.
Always, man. I'm like the Dumb and Dumber guy. So you're saying I got a shot, and honestly, I think you have to have that arrogance and confidence to be a gamer. You got, you know, I see so many of these guys, you know, in Supercross and motocross and stuff like that. They don't want to win. You know what I mean? I want to be in the fight, and then you know what I mean. Like, for one, let's sidebar. They got to do something about these first turns because they watch the heat races, and that's where you got 3 guys that want the whole shot in each race, and the rest of the guys that don't. Then when you put everybody in the thing, you got 10 guys that really, really want it, and the other 10 guys that want to be in the mix. So if they don't open up those first turns, we're going to get somebody killed.
Yeah. Right. So not everybody on the gate you necessarily thinks that way.
No, and they should.
Yeah.
And they really should. If they don't, you know, why race? You know, you're in a race. You're not in a, you know, go ride, go have fun, go enjoy your life. But why work so hard to go, hey, maybe I can make the night show? You know, maybe you need to go practice more. Maybe you need to do other things. But I know when I looked at Jeff Ward's eyes, he thought he was going to whip my ass. And so did Ronnie Lachine, and so did David Bailey, and Jeff Ward, and Bob Hanna. And, you know, those guys, they're sitting there thinking of ways that they're going to screw you, either in the first turn, off the gate, you know, all of these different things. And it all starting with the gate selection.
I was talking to Ryan Dungey today. That's a name drop there for you. But he mentioned this afraid to fail thing. You can't be afraid to fail. Like, you have to put it out there and be willing to say, I tried as hard as I can, but I got beat. But don't leave anything out there to say, well, I got beat, but. So at that point, you had to not be afraid to fail. Because with your wrist, the chances of it actually working were pretty slim. But you were willing to still do everything you could, and maybe it's not going to work, but you were trying.
Yeah, I had to give it everything because I was gonna hang it up at the end of '89 or no, at the end of '90 because I tried everything and it wasn't working. But then I went to Europe, and there were a bunch of like sandy supercrosses, like Weigandt, and I did decent in the Paris Supercross, and I was once again pounding that anti-inflammatory. Didn't know what I was doing to myself, but it made my hand feel good, so I didn't care. And thought, if I quit and go truck racing, and my hand gets better, I'm going to regret for the rest of my life that I didn't try. And then in '91, I came out and the throttle was sticking, which it wasn't the throttle. I had awesome mechanic Ron Heben, but my wrist was sticking, and it shot me off the track and into dugouts and some other crazy shit. And that's when I knew I gave it up. So yes, I had to give it my all, and I had to try, and because I felt for everybody. I felt for Honda. I felt for the different sponsors that were, that invested in me and in my family and my friends and the people that cheered me on, that wanted me to do well.
Hey, quick break here for the people that want us to do well. That is the good folks at Yoshimura. They're our sponsor of the Racer X Exhaust Podcast. 63 years of innovation in four-stroke exhaust. Check them out for anything you need for your dirt bike, ATV, or street bike, Yoshimura-RD.com. And we've got all new Racer X clothing for our spring line. Go to RacerXbrand.com. You probably have never heard of RacerXbrand.com until right now. So go there while you're listening to this continuing conversation with Rick Johnson. Back to that Atlanta race. Did you guys realize at the time, like, wow, that was an amazing one, that was an epic battle, or did it just seem like a race when it was over at first?
No, it just was a race.
Really?
It was, because it's like me growing up, man. I had so many giants to fight. I mean, when I jumped into it, Hanna was this crazy guy. Team Honda had six factory riders. Team Suzuki had, I think, four full factory guys, works bikes, and then Kawasaki had Goprecker, Tommy Bonolkin, Jeff Ward, and I think Ken Houghton at one point. You know what I mean? So I had all of these guys that were gnarly, gritty, that weren't afraid to knock you down. That was just part of the race, and fought hard. So when I got to that race, it really didn't get dirty at all. Everyone was passing everybody. That they did I think Dirtworks did this. John Savitsky built the track back then, so it was a very bitchin' racy track, and so that's the key, and that's the key that everyone needs to remember. The biggest star in Supercross. Do you know who it is?
It's a trick question. The fans?
Nope, the track.
Okay, all right. I'm like, give them a good race.
If the track looks like shit, everybody looks like shit. And they got to do something with the berms. They got to do something, and that track was awesome. Mm-hmm. If you notice, there's a lot of guys that, because John Savitsky, the way he built the berms, guys would come in out wide and then square off and exit down low and pass on the exit. You don't see that anymore.
No.
And it's just a product of the track, and they don't want to listen. I've tried to tell them because I've designed truck tracks, but a lot of the passing we can change, especially with 450s, if you just change the angle and where the entry of the corners and not have the steep part in the middle.
I noticed also that Atlanta track had corners that were relatively flat, but any flat corner now, it just becomes one rut on the inside. But there were there was like 3 or 4 lines in a flat corner, and they worked. Like one time the outside would be better, the next lap the inside would be better. That was bizarre to see that.
Well, watch it again and pay attention that the berm starts on the straightaway.
Uh-huh.
So if you're on the inside, I'm on the outside. I go in, I lean on the outside, and as soon as my turn starts, my wheel's leaning against something. I can cut hard and exit underneath you, or I can start powering up early. But the way the berms are now, the berm's not until the middle, so you can't lean on it on the entry. You have to lean on it in the middle, and then that's where you're changing direction, and that kills all your exit speed. And so that return, which in result makes one line.
That ends up being your last podium in Supercross. I know that you somehow were able to win a national at the end of the year, right, at Unadilla. You actually won your last national.
Yeah.
But that was your last Supercross podium. Do you think about that now? Like at the time, you probably didn't know it was going to be. But
well, I'll probably cry when we hang up the phone.
Okay.
And thanks for that.
Sorry, yeah.
You want to talk about when I got my shit kicked out of me in junior high?
Well, we won't celebrate your last 15th. We'll celebrate your last podium. That's still
there. You go. There you go.
Yeah.
I didn't. Honestly, I didn't even realize that. I realized that the one. My last race was actually my last American Supercross was in San Diego in '91.
Hey, I looked that up. Let me interrupt you with that. You finished 8th. How in the hell you got 8th and your wrist was just trash and you're like, this isn't going to work? But you were still 8th place.
Yeah, I was. But so here's what happened. So going into that race, on press day, they had a triple and then a big whoop section. And so the whoops were so big at the beginning, like you hit the brakes and you'd have to go 2, 2, 2, because they were like, they do those backhoe whoops, you know what I mean? So you couldn't blitz them or whatever. Anyhow, I landed off the jump. My wrist stuck. I was sitting on the back fender, hit the whoops, cleared all the whoops, cleared the turn, landed, smashed my face, and thought I broke my cheek, had a black eye, and I'm like, my throttle's stuck, and they're going, nah, it didn't stick. So then I do the race. I'm still beat up, pretty sore, and I get 8th. Then we go to Japan the next week, and we fly over to, I think it was Toshi or something like that. You know, real good planning. Did the Japan Supercross. I think
middle of the season. Jeez.
Right, did the beginning of the season. So we go over there. We do that big egg stadium or whatever. I think I get 3rd or 4th or something like that. That started kind of my rivalry with Chicken at the time. Anyways, so then I come back, and I'm supposed to fly out to go get on an early flight to get back to go do the dealer's autograph session in Atlanta. So I'm supposed to leave, I think, on a Wednesday, and I'm still really sore. So anyways, I screw up, set my alarm wrong, I oversleep, because it was an early flight to get back there. I call Honda, I'm like, I'm sorry I screwed up, I'll be on the next flight tomorrow morning, this and that. And so I go, well, since I got an extra day, I'll go ride. So I just went out in a field by my house, and I'm riding, and all of a sudden I come over this jump, and lo and behold, the friggin' throttle sticks. Now I'm going through across this field with the throttle stuck, and I'm like, what the? But I had more than a tenth of a second to figure it out. So I let go of the handlebar for a second, and I'm like, I never let go of the handlebar when I landed, and my hand would let go, re-grip the handlebar, and hold it wide open. So I'm like, this is involuntary. This is not my deal. So I said, I'm not in the points championship. I'm not this. And so I called Honda and said, I'm not coming to Atlanta. I'm flying to this Gem City Bone and Joint up in Wyoming. Supposed to be one of the best doctors, and he was like the 5th one I saw, and he just goes, there's nothing we can do. He says, you need to have your wrist completely fused. I'm like, I can't do that. I need my wrist. He's like, I'm sorry. You know, he's like, what did everybody else say? I said, well, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about you're supposed to be the guy to fix this, you know. And so I went there, and I went home. I cried. I called Honda, and I said, I'm not coming to the race, and I'm retiring at Daytona.
Wow.
And went there, and Honda hated me because they thought that I planned that, and like I wanted to do the first 5 races because my contract was if I lined up for the first race, it didn't matter when I got hurt that I got paid all year.
Right.
You know, I was paid pretty highly, and
right.
They thought that I did it just for the money.
I see.
And so that created I think that was when all of a sudden I quit getting invited to Honda stuff.
It is bizarre to me that guys at your level can get 8th. Like Kevin Windham was getting 10th or 9th or something at the beginning of the season a couple years ago, and he's like, I'm out, man. I can't do this anymore. We're like, you're still getting top 10s. And he's like, yeah, but it's over, man. So, yeah, your last race, when your wrist is so bad that you're leaping over whoops with the throttle pinned on accident, you got 8th. It wasn't even that bad.
Yeah, well, but the thing is, though, once you taste victory and you become that guy, everybody around you just looks at you like, what is your problem? You know, and you're like, like you said, I got 8th. Well, this ain't going to cut it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, everybody started to run for the trails. Brian Lunnis took off. Everybody did.
Yep. There were other guys up front. But that Daytona, you got hurt at Daytona after Gainesville. Did that actually matter to this wrist injury, or was the wrist injury just what it was and it was going to be bad anyway, or did that make it worse?
It made it worse because what happened so after Gainesville, I won, but I could not use my hand for 2 days. Like literally could barely hold a fork. So I didn't get to test and get my Daytona set up right, and so I was way off. And so in the heat race, I sucked, and so in the main I said, just put on what Stanton has. I don't care. I'm bucking all over the place, and so it had the step on, step off, and so the way you jumped it, you jumped up, you landed, and you leaned forward and you pinned it to shoot off so you didn't loop out. Well, I leaned forward and I went, because I couldn't twist my wrist. So I came up short and then bucked and threw me over the bars and broke the bone in my hand, my pinky metacarpal. They call it a boxer's break, like if somebody punches somebody or something like that. So then I came back too soon, and it started non-union. So that means when it's gooey and it's not tacking up, because I started riding too soon with it, and because I was testing at Hard Rock in Ocala for Tampa, and every time I hit, man, it was just like lightning going through my hand. So I went to the doctor. He says non-union, you need surgery. So they had to fuse those other bones. So I had to fuse another piece of my hand from the Daytona crash.
Yeah.
So yeah, it added to it, but I have nobody to blame but myself. I think everything would have been okay. I think I would have had problems if I would have just left the original pins in there and let the bones set, and then let God do his divine work. But instead, I thought, I got to get on the bike and I have to get riding as soon as possible, and that's the biggest mistake I made.
That's with the Daytona one, right?
That's with all of them.
Wait, even the original wrist injury from '89, you actually think you could have approached?
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't hopeless. You could have managed it differently.
I think, like I said, I think it would have been bad, but it would have been nothing like it was because I was stupid. I went down to the river and when I had the time off, and I had exterior pins in my hand, and somehow I got it infected, probably because it was sewer river water. got my, I tried to keep it dry, but I got it wet. Next thing I know, I got this massive fever, and I'm like, get these pins out of me, man. They literally felt like they were on fire. And I think that I lost some stability in my wrist, and then the bones started to grow together, and then I started riding too soon and didn't give it a chance to get strong. And so, yeah, I screwed up. I could sit there and go, that was a mistake, that was a mistake, that was a mistake, that was a mistake, and that's where I try to help these guys nowadays. Like whenever I just volunteer information to them, and they look at me like I'm some drunk old, some drunk old racer who doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. But I want to help them because I made so many mistakes, man. Not because I think I'm awesome and I was, the GOAT, which I hate that statement because there really is no GOAT. There's guys that have great records, but anyhow, and we're untouchable in their time. But the thing is that you can learn so much from somebody from their mistakes, and that's where I try to help these guys. Yeah,
you're actually pulling not from your successes here. You're actually pulling from your failure of screwing this part up.
Exactly. And I'm like, man, if I would have done this, if I would have just waited, because you're afraid that the train is going to leave the station without you. Meaning, I've worked so hard to get here, and I'm at this level. If I don't jump back on the train, I'm never gonna catch back up to Ward or this or that. And I think people need to look at Trey Kennard and how many devastating injuries he had, and how long he sat out. But he came back and was up to form.
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't 2 races, and he was like one of the guys.
Yep.
And so that was. I wish I would have had somebody giving me a list of things to do to prove that I was ready, and not because I can sit on a motorcycle, start it, and go.
That was your doctor's note at that point.
Exactly. Can you start it? Yep.
Okay.
1 down, 4 up, bro. Let's do this.
Was the navicular a big part of? That was a big part of this injury, right? The navicular.
Yeah. It's gone now. They took it out. They took that and two other bones out and took a chunk of my hip and fused the lower wrist bones to my wrist, to my arm. So now I just have basically two joints in there that move that it's been so long I got to get those changed as well. So, or fused or screwed or whatever.
Oh, this still 20, actually almost 30 years later. Sorry to remind you. Still has a factor, even not racing motorcycles.
Oh yeah.
Anymore.
I mean, I swing a hammer for 10 blows and I can't hold a glass in my hand. So I still have massive issues with it, and that was that was part of it. When it's your primary hand, it's hard because you do all kinds of weird shit. You know?
What I was getting as a navicular, now we know, like the navicular, man, you got to handle that thing with care. It doesn't heal well. You really got to be careful. You really got to do it right. But I don't know, was there that level of fear of the navicular back then? Did they have that knowledge of how brittle that thing could be?
Yeah, because I broke my navicular in 1981 on my left hand.
Oh, okay.
I broke my arm and it broke my navicular, and they didn't pin it; they just casted me in, and that's back when you did the first half was 120. I think let's just say 125, 250, and the second half was 250, 500, and the third half of the season was 500, 125. So anyway, so I had like a 6-week break in the middle, and so I got that done, and then got a brace for my wrist, and it healed up, no problems, and I was fine.
Gotcha.
But they knew. They said at the beginning, because they put me in a damn elbow cast, all the way around my elbow, and I'm like, I broke my wrist. Why you got this big stupid thing on there? They're like, because if you rotate your bones back and forth, you're going to start that non-union, and that's the thing that these guys don't get, is that you got to give your body a chance for the all the stuff in your body to tack up and start getting hard, and then it'll get harder and harder and harder. But if you break the cycle, you know what I mean? Like it starts to tack up, and you jack up the cycle. You start the bone moving. Next thing you know, your body tries to create a new joint, and then but still you have the pain of the broken bone. So it's like you're screwed on both sides.
Bro, you've learned way too much about the medical profession with this. That's what I've figured out. You've figured out you know way too much about this stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I go and I read X-rays and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, this and that, blah blah blah. But that goes with it, Like when I was working with Sebastian, he dislocated his wrist and stuff, and he dislocated it really bad. But he never had a problem with his wrist. You know what I mean? That wasn't the determining factor. He broke and dislocated his wrist just like I did. And he had a pin, and I said, you're not doing this, and then we went through a whole thing of what can you do before you get on the bike. He's like, I can twist the throttle. I'm like, I don't give a shit. Hold this hammer, move this, do that, pick this up. Ow, that hurts. Okay, what do you think is going to happen when you're sideways and when you case a big jump? You're going to let go with that hand, and you're going to bust yourself somewhere else.
I see. Oh, so the advice worked. See that?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yep. I can't control knees and other stuff, but I can.
You're a wrist specialist.
You can't control other injuries, but I'm a friggin' wrist specialist.
Yeah. Okay, so that was your last Supercross podium. Now you didn't even realize that looking back. It was just, you had been in so many gnarly battles. It was just like another gnarly battle at the time.
Honestly, I was more bummed that I lost. When I look back at Atlanta, I don't think of that. I don't think of, wow, I was in this epic battle. I think I got my ass kicked, and I let it go. I made some mistakes, and but like I said, I'm not taking anything away from Ward. He rode a great race, and that. So
yeah, no, it's the way it should be. No, your level, you're not proud of third. It's okay.
No, I was pretty humiliated, to be honest with you.
Oh, jeez. When Rick Johnson retired, he was the all-time career leader in Supercross wins. He never got another one, though, after the 5 in a row to start the 1989 season and breaking Bob Hanna's record at the time. It really was about the wins for Johnson. Now, you hear so much about riders who are great during the week. They're great motorcycle riders. They have tremendous skills, but they cannot transfer those skills and that speed over to Saturday when the racing actually counts. But then you hear about people like Johnson, who are the exact opposite. He lived for the combat. He lived for that battle. He lived for that limelight. But when the limelight turns off, when people start looking the other direction, when you can no longer race competitively and you can no longer be in that environment anymore, well, that's a tough toll. That's why RJ has continued to race in pretty much anything he can get his hands on. That's why Jeff Ward's continued to race in anything he can get his hands on. That's probably why Johnny O'Mara has been racing mountain bikes for 30-some years after retiring as a motocross rider. Some guys say, man, been there, done that. I burn the candle at both ends and I just want to relax. Other people will never, ever get enough of that championship competitive Jones and that feeling of going to the line and going for it. And riders of that era will tell you that no one could rise to the occasion better than RJ. Maybe he wasn't the best in practice. Maybe he wasn't the best during the week. But when it counted, he could find something in the moment. And that's why Atlanta's a bummer for him, because he was trying to do it one last time, trying to find something in the moment. But his body just wouldn't let him do it. And if you want a larger career retrospective on Rick Johnson, our man Mathis has done it. He's done it with pretty much every legend in the sport. So look for the Steve Mathis Classics when you look up Steve Mathis Show on iTunes or anywhere you get your podcast. Just type in Rick Johnson, Steve Mathis, and you'll find, I don't know when they did this, probably 8 or 9 years ago. And RJ has a tremendous memory for every single thing that has happened in his career, good and most importantly bad. So it's a great listen. If you want more RJ, go to Steve Mathis's podcast with him. We're thanking our sponsor again, Yoshimura, 63 years of development of four-stroke exhaust. Quality, performance, durability, everything you need for your dirt bike, your street bike, your ATV. Go to yoshimura-rd.com for more. Thanks to my man Big E for supporting these podcasts and also for sending me an email virus this week. Almost killed this whole show. That's it for the RacerX podcast. Go to racerxbrand.com. Get yourself some RacerX swag. We'll be back next week. Ryan Dungey is going to come on the show. Yeah, the Dunge. It's going to be a really good one. He goes deep, which you don't always get from him. But for now, enjoy the weekend off from the races. Hope you did. Jason Weigandt signing off. See you in the RacerX Exhaust podcast by Yoshimura next time.